Hi guys, Bill again. Now, Star Trek Beyond releases here next week, and I gotta admit, I'm starting to sweat. See, I'm a Trekkie, not a Trekker, not part of the hardcore of fans who attend conventions or spend a fortune on props and models, even get dressed up as their favourite TV stars. Me, I'm more casual. I've got the box sets, I read bios of some of the show's stars. My kids buy me collectibles. Exhibit A. I loved the shows. I really did. But as much as I loved the shows, I loved Gene Roddenberry's vision even more. And that's why I'm never going to be a fan of the J.J. Abrams reboot. You see, Gene gave us a vision of a noble, bright future where humanity walked forward, together, past differences forgotten, to take up our place out in the stars. Whereas JJ, well, JJ destroyed Vulcan just for the lulz, and he gave us a revenge trope by way of compensation. That was his first effort. You know, just like a whipped dog, I came back for more. Into Darkness was even worse than the first one, infinitely worse. Of all the fucking things that JJ could have taken a huge steaming shite on, why the fuck did it have to be Khan? You know, there's good films, and there are great films, but there are some films that just transcend the limits of the genre, and they become iconic, they redefine the entire art form. Kurosawa's Rashomon. Not a popular choice amongst feminists, not sure why that came to mind. Stephen's Shane. Kramer's The Wild One. Kubrick's 2001. Lucas's Star Wars, and the even better Empire, just 3 years afterwards. And Khan. So much Khan. If I had to choose one film from the 80s that defined the whole decade for me, it would be The Wrath of Khan. See, Kubrick had already shown us back in the 70s that sci-fi didn't have to be Pulp Fiction and shitty special effects. And Lucas had brought space opera to life. He'd finally offered us the visual spectacle that sci-fi authors and artists had been describing and painting for decades. But it was Gene who took our childhood heroes from the 60s, and he finally gave them the freedom to show us what we always knew they could be, up there on the silver screen. Khan was epic. It followed the finest storytelling traditions. It was like a latter-day Odyssey or Moby Dick. The special effects delivered an entirely new stylistic take on fantasy spaceships. It wasn't intended to be realistic, it was stylistic. The nebula scenes where they presented a fictional backdrop, an ocean of the future for our ships to sail through. Fantastic. But the key was the story. Khan's self-destructive rage, his righteous fury. It's a not very subtle metaphor for everything that's worst in the human condition, everything that Roddenberry just railed against. While the Enterprise crew, they spent the whole movie holding true to their friendship and their familial bonds, and when they finally did defeat their foe, they did it through teamwork, through ingenuity, and ultimately they did it through self-sacrifice. Now you can contrast that to JJ's work. Big explosions, a cast so pretty they really ought to be on daytime TV, and they've got some fucking refugee from a Star Wars set following Scotty around like a bad smell. Fucking pish. Gene used Star Trek to change our entire cultural narrative. He gave us a black woman in a position of authority on a starship bridge, at a time when most TV shows were wary of casting black people at all, even as servants. As helmsman, His helmsman was Japanese, unashamedly Oriental, casting an Asian, another cultural taboo at the time. You can imagine, you can see why. I mean, the situation in Vietnam was getting worse by the minute, and there were tensions with communist China that made it a really courageous move. And then, for his own corps, he even added a Russian navigator at the height of the Cold War. He's softly spoken, but he had balls of steel, he really did. The thing about Gene Roddenberry's characters, though, is they weren't tokens. He was very careful about who he cast, and he was really enthusiastic for the human condition. Each of his characters quickly established themselves on their own terms, and in terms of their fictional persona. Nichelle Nichols she's the one that always comes to mind. I used to love watching her calm, efficient manner on the bridge, and all the time you'd have those histrionics going down in the engine room with James Doohan's Scotty. There's a real contrast there. You always got the impression that she was on top of a really hard job, a difficult task. And, being a communications officer, it is bloody hard work out there in the real world. I don't think it should be any easier than a space opera. Years later, Enterprise had some fun with that. They had Linda Park cast as Hoshi Sato. She was a comms officer she was anything but calm, efficient, and on top of the job. So, it carries forward. George Takei's Sulu. He was the show's warrior. He was a fiercely competitive sportsman. He was a gymnast. He was a swordsman. And there's that nod to the Japanese samurai tradition. He was a keen botanist as well. And Walter Koenig, that was fantastic. He was hired as eye candy for the ladies. That warmth, the charm, the dashing young looks. And the thing that achieved, it threw a whole generation of Westerners into considering the notion that, maybe young Russians might be a lot like us. Even down to that Mickey Monkey's hairstyle. Ask your mum. In the show, he was characterised as being an extraordinarily talented scientist. It's kind of tricky to pull off in a TV show that's written by Pulp Fiction writers, but Walt did a pretty good job of it. The big stars of the show, though, they were a bifurcated hero, and they hinged on the fulcrum of wisdom. Leonard Nimoy he was implacable, he was cold-blooded, a completely logical thinker, an anti-humanist, if you like, antithetical to the whole human condition. William Shatner, he was irrepressible. James Tiberius Kirk, he was the exuberant, hot-blooded male. He was impetuous, he was passionate, but he was fallible. And DeForest Kelley was the elder voice. Bones McCoy, he was the captain's confidante. And he was also a dry wit and a foil to the aliens' inhuman calm and composure. The rest of the cast, the rest of the characters, tended to think of Spock as being completely emotionless. He didn't fool the Doctor, not for a minute. He knew what was going on underneath. It's amazing. The show, it only screened for 3 seasons before some prick in a suit got bored with it and pulled the funding. But everything changed in those 3 seasons. Our generation had a vision of a future that went beyond segregation, that went beyond national divides, when the differences between us were something that we could cherish and celebrate. They weren't something to be feared and rejected. The crew explored the human condition a lot more than they explored space. And once we'd seen what could be, we set about creating a little part of that utopian vision, all by ourselves. Now the audiences and the critics that were scoffing at Roddenberry's casting choices, back in '66, they wouldn't have recognised the world that I grew up in, the world that we created. You know, the late 20th century was owned by geeks. Space agencies ended up working together. It would have been inconceivable to them, you know, share science with the Red Rocket Men. But we've got an international space station now. You can get Brits up there. Captains in the army. Not sure how that worked. Anyway, it's when we saw May C. Jimison going up an Endeavour in September '92. That was incredible. We really saw the fruits of Jean's labour then. When she talks about it, she credits Nichelle Nichols with giving her that ambition to make it into space. And she used to watch Uhura's Grace Under Pressure every week. And it left her thinking that, well, being an astronaut was no big deal, you know. Perfectly natural career choice for a young lady. Back in the world of entertainment, there were various shows that followed on, and it started to become popular to feature black actors. But the tokenism was just painful. You know, sometimes a black guy would be some kind of comedy caricature, or some other time he'd be a Mary Sue. Asian actors were even less popular. David Carradine was a fine actor, but he was whiter than I am. You've got a show called Kung Fu, and you've got a white guy as the lead. After a while, the notion of foreign players in American drama started to fall out of favour. But at the same time, there were reruns, and Star Trek started to gain popularity. People would even cite their favourite scenes or their favourite episodes. And in the days before video recorders or DVDs, you'd make a point of catching the rerun, especially a good one, if you knew it was on. See, Gene's idea had taken root. So anyway, there was talk of a fourth season. Now, it didn't come to anything, but the sets were there. They were available to be recycled, and Star Wars had made an absolute fortune, so why not? They they got a script together, and it was penned by none other than Alan Dean Foster. Now, Alan ghosted for George Lucas, so if you've actually read Star Wars, you've actually read Alan Dean Foster's work. The movie itself was a bit of a mixed bag. The new Star Wars movie was stupidly expensive, mainly on the special effects front, and there wasn't much scope in the script for the actors to show what they were capable of. What it came down to was they made a sequel, but it was going to be a low budget affair. Low budget, but big ideas. Roddenberry had to go back to his roots, and when he did, the film was an absolute blinder. Now, me personally, I think it saved the franchise. After that, it was just a matter of time before we started to get more films and more TV shows. It was just inevitable. And it's still going on today. The next Star Trek instalment is coming to the screens next year. The thing is, it better be good. The fan films that you can catch right here on YouTube have set the bar pretty damn high. On an unrelated note, CBS and Paramount have been utter cunts to the fan base that are creating this new content. But those fuckers have never had the first clue what their IP was all about anyway. Anyway, moving on. JJ is another person who just doesn't get it. Now, unlike the Suits, he's actually a fan. He makes beautiful creations. He understands cinematography like nobody else. He's Hollywood's new golden boy right now. But his films are shite. I'm not being funny. He's got all the gear but no idea. So I'm nervous. I want the film to be good. I want the series to succeed. I don't want to be that fat geek whining about how the guys making the films I love are ruining the films I love. You know, you've seen it. Yeah. Simon Pegg wrote the new script. This could be bad. Simon Pegg is pretty well known as a comedy actor. Now, he's moderately well known as a scriptwriter, and he's almost completely unknown as having written his undergraduate thesis at the University of Bristol on, and I'm quoting this, a Marxist overview of popular 1970s cinema and hegemonic discourses. And no, that's not an ironic title. He's a proud supporter of he for she. Give you an idea of the mindset. This could be very bad. He's on record as stating that he has concerns about Starfleet's colonial approach to alien relations, and that he's tried to invest that disapproval of real-world post-colonial regimes into the new script. Fuck. If you're from North America, the chances are that you've got no idea what it's like living next to fannies like that. I mean, I'm fully prepared for over an hour of this.
But at this point, I'd just like to take a moment to apologise on behalf of Britain for all the things that we've brought to the world. Simon Cowell, for example, and Jim Davidson, fox hunting, black pudding, racism, but most of all, we're so terribly, terribly sorry about Piers Morgan.
Aye. See, the English are very aware that the Empire was mostly win for their little corner of it, but perhaps not quite so good for everybody else. Middle England tends to spend its whole bloody life apologising for the alleged sins of the fathers. Just don't. Seriously, just fucking don't. Believe me, I've got no reason to love the British Empire. My entire race was almost wiped out in 2 centuries of what we'd call ethnic cleansing these days. In 1707, the Gaels made up half the population of Scotland. And today, well, with the source of some funny surnames around the world, and a few rural populations on the wee islands off Scotland's Atlantic coast. So what? Simon, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything. You've got no responsibility for the shite that other people in another time got up to. You're welcome in my country, on my island, hell, in my home if you're ever passing. If you need forgiveness, then fine, you're forgiven. Stop feeling bad about things that you did not do. To be honest, you don't even have to lose any sleep over the new picture. I mean, the last 2 are that bad that nobody's going to be particularly bothered if this one sucks as well. Having said that, there's a ray of hope. And you know, funnily enough, it comes from the Pegster's progressive tendencies. Simon hasn't resorted to tokenism in any of his previous projects, and he hasn't chosen to overtly represent minority concerns either. But this script includes an openly gay character. Why? Well, mainly because it's about bloody time. One of Gene's most famous quotes is, you get this all over the internet, he said that Star Trek was an attempt to say that humanity will reach maturity and wisdom on the day that it begins to not just tolerate, but take a special delight in the differences in ideas and differences in life forms. if we cannot learn to actually enjoy these small differences, to take a positive delight in these small differences between our own kind here on this planet, then we don't deserve to go out into space and meet the diversity that's almost certainly out there somewhere. Now about 8% of our population here in the West are homosexual. Figures vary because, well, quite frankly, somebody's sexual orientation is nobody's business but their own, but regardless of that, it seems very odd that there are no gay people in Star Trek. One or two things is going on there. Either homosexuality has been eradicated in the future, which would make humans the only developed social animals on the entire fucking planet not to exhibit homosexual behaviour, or in the 23rd century, people's sexuality just isn't an issue anymore. Now, Uhura and the foreign characters in the original series, they worked so well precisely because the attribute that we felt compelled to focus on at the time, the race, was just a complete non-issue in the TV series, in the fictional future that Roddenberry created. The effect just completely rewrote our cultural narrative. In the real world, we began to see beyond arbitrary judgment calls based on what we used to use to define people. So there's a lesson there for modern SJWs. Don't suppose there's many watching this right enough, but hey. If Peg is trying to do the same thing with sexuality that Roddenberry did with race, then it gives me some kind of hope that he's following Roddenberry's lead rather than just trying to destroy his legacy for reasons. Peg isn't just a lefty-lovey with a back catalogue of Hollywood supporting roles. He's a geek. He's an uber geek. He's one of us. He's been referencing Star Trek in interviews and even in his work forever. He loves Star Trek with a passion. He's not going to deliberately do anything to damage the series. However, all is not well with the choice that he made for his gay lead. George Takei is hopping mad. His Zulu was anything but a closet queen. How dare Simon Pegg out him? Let it, George. Sorry, darling, but it's not all about you. A new character would just be the gay guy or the gay girl. You know, it would be tokenism at its very worst. It'd just be self-defeating. So you've got to pick somebody from the existing cast. Now, Spock and Uhura are non-starters for obvious reasons. Kirk would look like a deliberate decision to derail the entire franchise for political reasons, so that's not going to happen either. Counterproductive. McCoy's a medical professional. We've gotten used to seeing gay doctors and gay male nurses on TV. If you made McCoy openly gay, you'd be playing to a stereotype. And again, that wouldn't really achieve anything. Scotty would be the ideal candidate. But the problem there isn't so much Scotty as Peg. Simon Pegg's already got a mammoth task on his hands. He's got to convince audiences, including his wife, a Scottish lady from Glasgow, that he's actually a Scot while he's up there on the big screen. He's also taken on script writing duties, and he's also, because of that, taken up liaising with the movie's producers to try and get his vision of his story brought to life on the big screen. It'd be a huge ask to try and have him convincingly portray a gay man as well as all those other things. So Scotty's out. Anton. Rest in peace, buddy. Anton Viktorovich Yelchin's Chekhov was a fresh-faced kid. The actor was 27 years old, 26, 25 when he played him. Out there in the real world, dealing with showcasing such a young looking, fresh-faced character being in a homosexual relationship would cause a massive controversy. Remember that the role is an attempt to cement the acceptance of a perfectly natural facet of human behaviour into the audience's minds. Creating some kind of moralistic shitstorm. It might get people seeing the movie, but it's not what you're trying to do. And that leaves Sulu. Now, Sulu is a positive role model. The guy is an accomplished Starfleet officer. He's a martial arts expert, and now, in the latest movie, he's also a loving father. And the role was once played by one of Hollywood's best known gay rights activists. It's not a difficult choice. Now, pre-screening has had mixed reviews. I'm avoiding reading them, or even watching trailers. I'll watch the film next week, and I'll make my own mind up. But I'm nervous, guys. I really am nervous. Wish me luck, eh? Laters.